Community Initiative, Grant Housing Community Radio, GHCR 95.9 on your dial. We are accessible on YouTube, Grant Live. You can access us there. And we also have a website. So we welcome you to Behind the News. I'm your host and producer, Nella Hester Bailey. Again, we welcome you to the news. We're going to spend the next hour talking with our special guest. She is a remarkable woman. She's a community organizer. She is a veteran of many community initiatives in Brooklyn. Her name is Alicia Boyd, and she is the founder of Movement to Protect the People. And we're very happy to have her on. Alicia, if you Google her name, she has been cited in a number of books on gentrification. She has been part of and participated in a number of, or at least I know of one, documentary film. And so, anyway, we're welcome to have her. But first, we want to say that the views and opinion expressed in this program are that of me and my guest and does not reflect the views of the management nor the Tenants Association. Alicia Boyd, welcome to the program.
Hello, thank you.
Well, we're just getting a little late start here, but Alicia, let's start with how communities look at development that is coming, or developments that are coming into their neighborhood. And I know that one of the things that we discussed was heights of the building, the limits of that, and going back to 1991. Can you talk about that and bring us up to date in terms of why this is an important criteria in terms of communities understanding and looking at development with respect to heights?
In my community, I live in the Crown Heights, Bush Avenue community in Brooklyn, and my community literally borders what we call public green space sensitivity, light sensitivity areas, and that's Brooklyn Botanic Gardens and Prospect Park. You know, obviously these are very large public green spaces that require, a lot of sunlight. But in particular, the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens is even more particular because they actually grow and propagate plants, store plants. They have award-winning plants. They have very important species, extinct plants. They have a whole selection. They have almost over about 30,000 types of plants and species that they actually propagate, store, and create. So that area is a very sensitive area, and tall buildings then cast shadows along them and impede upon the growth of these plants and their ability to survive and be maintained and stored and created. So in 1991, underneath the Dinkins administration, they were redoing this area in Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, creating conservatories and fixing up the greenhouses, and they noticed that there was some property bordering BBG that could eventually get some very high heights. So they went to the city and said, "Hey, we want to make sure that we're protecting, this public green space. Can you please, put height limits?" And this was really the first time the height limits were actually introduced into New York City, and it was done to protect sensitive areas. It was done, for this reason. Like, not here, not along this particular parameter. There should be no height. There should be height limits, and so they put height limits of 6 to 7 stories, basically 70 feet. They did shadow studies. They went through the community. It was, a very quiet rezoning. Nobody really said anything, and it passed. And so the height limits were then placed onto this area. And then in 2000, when Bloomberg came into power, he decided to take height limits and then kind of disperse them into white upper middle class communities. And it no longer became, protecting a sensitive green space. It became, let's protect the neighborhood. Let's make sure that the neighborhood has, a certain height and that they don't have tall buildings. And so Bloomberg must have rezoned about 140 white middle class communities and put height limits on those communities. And what happened is, because you then started restricting the potential growth in these communities, the property values communities went up, and then also the rental markets went up. And so then you found yourself, white people not being able to go back into these white communities, and then varying now into communities of color to be able to find affordable housing, quote unquote, which then started the gentrification and displacement, because that started moving into communities of color. Rent started increasing. Landlords started seeing white people were coming in. They started raising their rents, and they started removing the people of color, black populations. And then, so while this was happening, my community, Brooklyn, started to become a hot spot. By 2012, 2013, all of a sudden everybody wanted to come to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn was seen as, the next big thing. And so developers began to buy a property in that one particular area that had those height limits. They bought it in 2014 with the understanding that a rezoning was going to happen. Unlike the rezonings under the Bloomberg administration, the de Blasio administration's rezoning was actually the opposite. They were going to upzone everything, because now they needed to create affordable housing, because you now had a housing crisis. That was actually done by the Bloomberg administration. But then de Blasio's answer was, let's go into communities of color and let's increase the heights there, because the white communities already had their protections and their downzoning, and so the only place to really go up was in communities of color. And so a rezoning was being planned. My community along the same strip, so they were going to remove the height limits that were placed, then allow the heights to develop as high on it. So plan was placed. Myself and my group and other groups in the community, we fought against the proposal. So the community was able to stop and don't it. What? And okay, she's 100%.
Excuse me, Alicia. Excuse me, Alicia. You are breaking up, and it's happening with more frequency as we are going along. Is it? Do you have your? You're breaking up.
Community still try to get more around zoning document, kept filing law to get
Alicia. Excuse me, Alicia?
Because their behavior, violent. Yes. Okay.
You
break. Hello. Hello.
You are breaking up, and your recitation isn't. It's not coming through clearly, because it's choppy, and it's. Do you have your speakerphone on?
No. This is a landline, and I'm on my phone. I don't have it on speaker.
Oh, this is your landline. I wonder why it's breaking up like that. Well. Anyway, let's continue. And would you include? Would you also talk about the difference between upzoning and downzoning as you continue your narrative? Okay.
Down zoning is when you take a piece of land, because all land has, they have zones. So that means is that you have certain restrictions on how much you can build on a square footage, for example. And so if you're going to upzone, that means you're going to increase the amount of building that you can build. So if you can build only 6 stories, if you do an upzone, you can build 12 stories, or you can build 50 stories. If you're doing a downzoning, it's the opposite. So that means is that if you had could build a 5-story building, you do a downzoning, then you only can build a 3-story building. Now, in New York City, they're not doing downzoning, right? It's clear when you see what's going on all over New York City. There's no such thing as downzoning.
Right.
You can ask for it, but nobody's getting it.
Because the profit is in upzoning.
Right. The profit is in upzoning, and so everybody's getting upzoned. So every one of de Blasio's communities that were being targeted, and my community was one of them, was being targeted for upzoning, even though they were making the claim to the local residents that they were really asking for downzoning. They were really asking for protection, but really it wasn't. It's just a Trojan horse, We're going to downzone you, and then once the application gets to the Department of City Planning, then they just upzone you and there's nothing that you can do. So in my case, in the case here, that district-wide rezoning didn't happen because we stopped it. And so the developers had to now put an application in as a private developer. Now, that's a little bit more difficult to do and to get because you're taking a community plan and you're letting a private individual break that plan. But the justification was, yes, we're going to break the plan, but we're going to create affordable housing. So it's worth breaking the plan. And so there were 2 major developments happening. One was only for 20 stories. The other one was for 50 stories. So they decided to let the 20-story private application go through first, believing that that was going to pave the way for the 50-story one. But the way that they did it, the city violated what we call the environmental review process. So there is a process when you are rezoning, especially if you're going to go higher, that you have to take into consideration the environmental consequences.
Is that mandatory?
So, of course, one of the environmental... I'm sorry?
Is it mandatory? Is it just, it's not a matter of choice?
Yes, it's mandatory.
It's legal. It's a legal requirement.
It's a legal requirement for you to look at the environmental consequences. Mm-hmm. But what the city did and the developers did is they maneuvered the numbers. They fabricated, they left out information so that they wouldn't have to do the environmental impact statement. And this then, allowed the developer to break the height limits, to create 3 hours of shadows over the garden and not have to be held accountable for that. Because according to the city and the developers, that wasn't going to happen. And, and the city made the claim that they did the environmental review correctly. Of course, we stated otherwise. We had proof that they had fabricated and lied. We had proof that they did not follow the state and the city's mandatory review process, and that they failed to consider very key pieces of consequences. One was the major consequences was luxury development being done in a moderate income community. Mm-hmm. And there's now a growing body of studies that show that when you bring luxury development into communities of color that are moderate to low, moderate income communities, that you cause a wave of displacement. They just completely ignored that. They ignored the water and sewage issue when you're adding, more sewage to the sewage system. So there was a lot of things that they failed to do, and so we challenged it and we filed the lawsuit.
Okay, Alicia, just for folks who may have just tuned in, this is, just let me identify the program, Behind the News. Host and producer Nellie Hester Bailey. Our guest is Alicia Boyd. Now, Alicia, in this pause, if you could just give us context for this discussion. We are talking about the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, and we are talking about a development that will overshadow the garden, correct?
Yes, there are two major development projects that are underway that would cast between 3 to 4 hours of shadows on the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, and specifically on their green space, their greenhouses, and their conservatories. And the Brooklyn Botanic Garden staff has stated very clearly that if these developments were to actually occur, that over 50% of their livestock, their plant life would die within 10 years.
Oh my goodness!
So they really talked about some serious damage, because these are very light-sensitive ecosystems. And that's the reason why you're supposed to have the environmental review process, so that you can prevent that kind of scenario from happening, so that, everybody would know, oh, that's going to harm the garden. Let's not do that. That development can't happen. But the city is so pro-development at this point, whereas prior, underneath the Dinkins administration, they were more concerned about the public green spaces. They were more concerned about what the residents were concerned about in their quality of life and maintaining, a garden that receives over 1 million visitors a year. But then now, in this very pro-development political environment, the city has taken a very different position. The city's position is, whatever the developers want, we're going to give them that. And we're going to make sure that we manipulate the numbers, or we're going to look at the law, we're going to circumvent the law to ensure that the developers get what they want. And in this case, they let the developers, a winning hand without doing the proper environmental review process.
So another review here of what we've discussed so far is that the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, which is public space and also a cultural, iconic fixture in the city and in the world, in that 1 million people pass through those gates to view the garden. And when you look at that, just in terms of the trade-off, because that is revenue. It garners revenue for the city. And if, in fact, the staff has predicted or opine that if this building is to go up, the garden will lose 50% of its plant life, and this plant life is vital to the sustainability and the general public existence of an iconic venue or site in the city. And so when you, from what you describe, when you take into consideration this myriad of factors with respect to this development project, it's a no-win for visitors, for local residents, for the city, as a revenue generator? I mean, what it's the city, the leadership of the city, so greedy that it would put at risk for the sake of making profits for developers something as crucial as this. The park is like a library, right? It's where you take your family.
Right.
It's where you take school trips for the kids or everything. So, in fact, what they are doing when you look at the City Planning Commission is that they're destroying what makes the city and the cultural vitality of the city rendered null and void. That's a summation of what you said, but some of the other extenuating factors in what you've just described. So if you could continue.
One of the things that is very interesting about this particular case, this lawsuit, is first that it's being brought on by what we call pro se litigants. I'm a pro se litigant. That means is that we do not have an attorney. And this is very unusual for anyone to, do a major, pushback against the city that's not an attorney. And what happens is in New York City, the city is very used to going into communities of color, especially at this low to moderate income communities, and doing exactly what they want. Mm-hmm. They don't follow the rules. They don't follow the laws. Because they know that there's a very small chance that anybody in that community is going to be able to garnish up the resources to be able to pay for litigation or a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. I mean, it takes between $50,000 to $100,000 to wage a lawsuit that we are currently waging. And when you go into a community that the average income is $40,000 and you have to raise $40,000, the probability is very small.
Exactly.
And so the city looked at this community and said, oh, well, this is just a low, moderate income community. We could do whatever we want. Developers, you tell us what you want. We're going to make it happen for you. We're just going to dock up the numbers, and we're just going to push this through. And that's exactly what they did, right? So they were completely shocked when, as pro se litigants, that we pushed back and filed a lawsuit. But then even at that point, they figured, oh, these are pro se litigants. They don't know the law. They don't know how to do what they're supposed to do. And this is going to be over very quick and fast. However, what they're finding out after 10 months later is that it has not been that easy, that we do know what we're doing, and that we are availing ourselves of the law, that we do know the law. And this has then pushed the city to even be more egregious in their behavior. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. We had a temporary restraining order. It's called a TRO, a temporary restraining order against the developers and the property owners not to disturb or pour any cement while the case is pending. And this is a very important thing, because if the developers are allowed to pour the cement and lay the foundation for these buildings, then our lawsuit, we lost the lawsuit before a decision has been made in the courts, because we're challenging their ability to build the building. So if they begin to build the building, then we've lost the lawsuit before it's even been decided. And so the higher courts allowed us, the court that we went to allowed us to have temporary restraining order. However, what the city then began to do is plot with the developers to give them permits, building permits, that violated the temporary restraining order and allowed them to pour the cement.
Now, the temporary restraining order is issued by the court. So, in other words, it sounds as if you're saying that the city participated in ignoring the court order, and that it could have forced the developer into a different kind of compliance situation. Is that a stretch?
The city was very much aware that there was a temporary restraining order.
Exactly.
After the temporary restraining order was already in place, the developers went and applied for what you call a voluntary environmental cleanup program that's based upon the rezoning. So the city issued them a permit, and that permit was going to allow them to excavate the soil and to lay the foundation. And the irony of that is that the city, being us, the people, were going to pay for it. This is a program that in 2009, underneath Bloomberg, allows developers to get their foundations poured and laid by city funds if it's a part of a rezoning. So you have the rezoning that's being challenged, but you have city issuing a permit based upon that rezoning that would allow them to disturb the cement, disturb the soil, lay the cement in violation of the temporary restraining order. And the city, the Department of Buildings, was on the lawsuit. So they knew about the temporary restraining order. But this is the city. The city doesn't care. The city does what it wants to do. And they issued the permit. And so we had to go back to the judge. We had to show the judge that this permit was being issued. The judge had to modify, change the TR temporary restraining order to include you cannot disturb the soil.
And if you can't disturb the soil, then you certainly can't lay the cement.
Right. And you cannot do an environmental cleanup. So the environmental cleanup permit, you cannot do it. But that wasn't the end. When that scam didn't work, then the Department of Buildings issued a permit to build, to lay the foundation based upon an old permit that was issued in 2015. Now, what we know is that when a rezoning happens on a piece of land, a property owner cannot use the old rezoning. They have to use the new rezoning. And the only way they can use the old rezoning is that if they have laid the foundation based upon the old rezoning. But this didn't happen. There's no foundation. And yet the city granted them the permit. And so that's when we had to go in front of the bulldozers. We had to insist that this permit was violating the temporary restraining order. They were planning on digging up and laying the foundation, and 5 people got arrested. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All because the city was working with the developers to violate the temporary restraining order in violation of their own rules and regulations. But again, this is the city, and nothing happens to them. 5 people got arrested. We now have criminal charges. And what happened to the developers? Nothing. They came in and said, "I'm sorry, Your Honor." And that was the end of that.
2 questions. So
this is
2 questions.
This is our lawsuit.
Mm-hmm. 2 questions, Alicia. Address the what I'm going to ask now last, but from your narrative, it begs the question: what was the role of the elected officials when clearly there were these violations committed by the city itself, the city of New York, in contradiction to its own regulations? And of the 5 people who were arrested, what were the charges? And later on, if you could talk about the status of that. So please let us...
just for, again, background information, rezonings and height restrictions fall underneath the city council. It's a city ordinance. These are city rules. So it falls underneath your city council person. Mm-hmm. My council person who covers this area is Councilwoman Lori Cumbo, who's also the majority leader. And the majority leader is the second most powerful position in the city council. So she holds a very, very powerful position in the city council, and she's the one who agreed to the rezoning. Now, the irony of that is that she made the claim at the end of the rezoning process, when there was a lot of contention and a lot of pushback from the community about it. She made that she had worked out a miracle deal, and she was going to get us an additional 117 affordable units. However, when we filed the lawsuit, we asked for this community benefits agreement, and they said none existed. So she just outright there lied. It's on the news. It was recorded. It was reported in the newspaper that there was these affordable housing that was connected to this rezoning. Nothing. There's nothing in writing. And this is a typical way in which our elected officials function, especially in communities of color. They will lie and say anything, and they don't believe they're going to be held accountable. So she agreed to rezoning. We didn't get the 117 affordable units because it was never really a negotiable. It was not connected to the rezoning. And she just lied. And because she's the one who said yes to the rezoning, all the other city council people followed her and said yes and made the rezoning happen. So we filed the lawsuit, and we put her name first on the lawsuit. So if you want to look up this lawsuit, it's called Boyd versus Lori Cumbo, who's our local city council person, also the majority leader. As far as our arrests are concerned, I was arrested along with 4 other people. We were charged with disorderly conduct and refusing to move out of the way of traffic or something, because we were not allowing the trucks to go in and out of the property so that they could continue to violate the temporary restraining order. The irony is that we ourselves had called the police because we had a temporary restraining order against them not doing what they were doing, but instead we're the ones who got arrested. Because everybody said, the police said that they can't enforce the temporary restraining order. So we were just wondering, well, who enforces the temporary restraining order? They said the courts. I mean, how does that happen? So anyway, we got arrested. We're going back to court in Brooklyn on the 10th of February. And we're going to see what happens.
What was the position of Brooklyn's borough president, which is a rather high position, and the borough presidents are very, very much connected with large-scale developments, certainly housing in all respects. So can you talk about the response, or whether or not you received any support from the Brooklyn Borough President, which would be Eric Adams?
Right. Our borough president is Eric Adams. And Eric Adams, for the last 6 years, has been pushing gentrification and development in our communities. He has went on the record talking about gentrification is something that's good for the community, and it's just a mindset. And he has been pushing programs where, for example, where you can buy property, church property, and get developers to come and build on the property. And he's been supporting all of these major rezonings as they come through his office with their stamp of approval. So what we found funny here in Brooklyn was how just recently he was in Harlem talking about how people from Ohio need to go back to Ohio, talking about gentrifiers that are coming into the community should go back to the community, where they live, when we've seen here in Brooklyn how supportive he is of gentrification, how he's supporting development. And of course he didn't say anything, when we went, he didn't make any comment about, this developer. We also know that he has a nonprofit called One Brooklyn, and that is a major fundraising event that he has been pushing all of the developers' money into this nonprofit. And so he has now a nice little war chest to run for mayor, but now all of a sudden he's anti-gentrification. He's anti-developer. He wants white folks to go back home. But we know that he has been pushing this agenda for the last 6 years, and that's why Brooklyn has had so much development happening, and Brooklyn is one of the highest places of displacement of people, because Eric Adams has been very pro-developer, and has been getting money from them, and has been pushing gentrification. And only now that he wants to run for mayor, all of a sudden his tune is changing, but his actions are not. Mm-hmm. He's still pushing for development in our communities.
Well, that appears to be the scenario in each and every community that you can think of, the portrayal of the yes. misleadership class. But continue with the case and where it is now, and any other relevant issues you have not addressed.
Well, one of the things that we noted was how so many elected officials are now running on the campaign that they're not taking any money from developers. A lot of them already have war chests that have tons and tons of money from the developers, but now moving forward, they're not taking any money from developers because they know that there's a tide changing in the community. They know that the community is no longer buying, all we need to do is create more affordable housing, when all it is just more luxury development, and communities are just becoming more and more unaffordable. The housing, the homeless population is soaring to almost 100,000 people. There was a recent study that was done that showed that 114,000 children in New York City are homeless. That's a lot of children. That's a lot of children. And there was another study by HUD that says that 50% of the homeless population in America are black, and yet we only comprise of 13%.
Could you recite that data again, please, Alicia?
HUD just came. Housing Urban Development of the federal government, HUD, just came out with statistics that states that over 50% of the homeless population are black people, not people of color, but black people, and despite the fact that we only comprise 13% of the population in America. And that's what you have, the homeless crisis, right, here in New York. And we're the second, right? California is number one. New York City is number two in the homeless crisis. So we are almost ground zero here for homelessness. And that is not being eliminated or alleviated by the creation of affordable housing. Because we know that the developers have too much say over what type of income is required in order for you to be able to even afford to get into these affordable units. We know underneath the MIH program, the Mandatory Inclusionary Housing Program that was entered in 2016 by the city, through the city council, that developers can target people who make $80,000, $100,000, $150,000, $173,000, all the way up to $212,000 income. So if you're a developer and you're building luxury development along the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, and you got all of these garden views, what target are you going to choose? If you have the choice, and they have the choice, they can choose up to $212,000 people who make that kind of money. And that's what they've been choosing. And we see that now. We see that these apartments are completely out of reach for the average New Yorker, and let alone the individual residents that live in the individual communities. My community average median income is $40,000. And yet the developers are going to develop affordable housing that's for somebody who makes $100,000. It's not going to be affordable for the residents. So they have a win-win situation. They get all of the funding. They get all of the subsidies. They get a chance to build where it used to be 7 stories. They can build 20 stories. And then the apartments, there's a market rate apartments that are classified as affordable. So now they're looking at people who make $110,000, $130,000, $170,000, and those apartments are going to go for those people. They're not going for the people who are making $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000. It's just not. They're not doing it, and so we are seeing the results of this affordable housing scam, where all it's creating is luxury development and creating displacement of people of color. Hello? Nellie?
Yes, I'm
Oh,
here. I'm
okay.
here. I was just
okay.
waiting for you to finish up. Alicia, bring us up to date just in terms of the court appearance.
Okay. Yes. We have put in a motion for sanctions against the developer for breaking the temporary restraining order. Even if they had a permit, they still had a temporary restraining order that stated that they could not disturb the soil, and yet that's what they were doing. Nor could they pour the cement, even though that's what they were trying to do. So we put a sanctions motion for them to be sanctioned and for them to pay for our expenses, our legal expenses. So that is in front of the court. The court also has to decide whether or not their motion to dismiss. That means they want to dismiss the lawsuit. And they want to dismiss the lawsuit based upon the fact that they're making the claim that we don't have the correct developer on the lawsuit. There's a body of law that says that if you're going to challenge, the city's, position, you also have to include the person, the applicant, on record. And that's what we did. We included Cornell Realty Management, LLC, onto the lawsuit. They now are making the claim, despite the Cornell Realty Management, LLC's name is everywhere on all the applications and all the final determination and everything in front of this council has Cornell Realty Management. They're making the claim that Cornell Management no longer own the application, that it was actually given to another party, which is called CP6, and they're the new owners of the application, and so our lawsuit needs to be dismissed because we don't have the right person or the right entity. So they have a motion in front of the court to dismiss our lawsuit. We have a motion in front of the court for them to have sanctions for breaking the temporary restraining order, and then there's a bond hearing that is also being scheduled. And the bond hearing means that any time you prevent, somebody like a property owner from engaging in their rights because you're holding this lawsuit, you have to place a bond. However, because we're a low to moderate income community, we're going to ask for a bond that's reasonable that we can raise and not something that would be so outrageous that we would lose because we can't raise the bond. So those are the things that we are currently working on in the case. And so we're due to go back to court on February the 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. And the judge said he's very close to making a decision on their motion to dismiss. So we'll find out if, that argument that they are producing is something that he's going to agree with or disagree with. And then we will find out if the case is going to move forward or if we have to file an appeal and go to the appellate court.
Oh, I see. Can you talk about these developers and their companies, whether or not they've had a controversial relationship with other communities that they've gone into? Do they come in like gang bangers, or tell us about these developers, and if you can establish their relationship to people in the government, to the New York City government.
Well, what we know is, unfortunately, one of the questions that we asked, because there was this whole question about whether or not we had the right party on the case, and because there's all these LLCs, and they create an LLC, then they buy the property, and then they create another LLC, and they transfer the property to somebody else, and then there's a deed, and there's 5 deeds. I mean, if you look at the history of these developments, it's a mess. There's got so many LLCs, and we know that LLCs, you can't see behind an LLC.
Exactly.
That's why they create the LLCs, so that they can hide, right? We asked the court to let us see behind these LLCs because they're making this assumption that, oh, no, Cornell Realty Management is no longer a part of any of this. But we were like, wait a minute, we know that they are. So let's see behind the LLC. The court refused to grant us the permission to do that. We also know that CP6 is actually a real estate investor that comes from California. So this is an investment firm, and so they invest in making money. They're not here to create affordable housing; they're here to make money. And so we know that they have ties coming in as an investment firm from California. What's one of the most interesting connections, however, is the connection between Cornell Realty Management and the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And we found that is very interesting. We found that members of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden board are connected to Cornell Realty Management, LLC, either through the financial aspect, the banks that are supporting Cornell Realty Management, and having members of the board, BBG's board, also being high-ranking members of the banks. We also have partners that are invested in some of the land along BBG, also are board members of BBG. So we see that connection. And we also saw one final connection, and that was the lawyers that showed up for the developers. One is called Abe and Fensterman, and this lawyer, this law firm has a man named Carone, and Carone is the lawyer for the Democratic Party boss. And the Democratic Party boss is the one who chooses the judges. So Carone is so connected to the political system and specifically to the court system. So here you have that law firm representing the developers. You got Carone, who is a member of that law firm, who also represents the Democratic Party boss, and the Democratic Party boss is the one who chooses the judges. So there's all these interconnections that are happening that we see of why this development has passed, has gone through and got the rubber stamping because of these connections, these political connections, these money connections. And this is the evidence that we have found.
Do you think it's likely that because these fights and these challenges become models in and of itself, and the other side, the developers, are taking note of this, what do you think this resistance and fight back from your group will have on future developments in terms of local groups challenging, let's say, the height limits or whether or not it's upzoning and the adverse impact of that upzoning within that community? What do you think your case represents in terms of a model, an organizing and fight back, pushback model for others?
Well, I would like to just step back and talk about the Inwood rezoning. This was the major district-wide rezoning that happened up in Manhattan. And they did a wonderful job at organizing and resisting. And they didn't rely upon the local nonprofit to wage a war on their behalf, because that's not how you do that. Right? You're not successful. The nonprofits get money from the city. The nonprofit gets money from the developers. They don't fight as hard as when you have your own people fighting. And Inwood was able to, at least in the lower courts currently, able to overcome the city's rezoning policy. And this was a first. I mean, this has made history, you know. And it shows that there is a movement happening, a groundswelling in the community, not in the courts, but in the community. And we are reflective of that movement. Every time we go to court, we fill up the courtroom. I mean, normally you might fill up the courtroom once, but we've been to court already almost 10 times, and every time that courtroom is standing room only. This is showing how much interest these cases are and how important the community sees these cases. And it's also putting pressure on the courts. Because when the judges see, the media there, when the judges see the crowd there, then they act a little bit better. And they look at the law a little bit closer. And they know that the decisions are really going to be looked at and analyzed very closely. And so they're on their best behavior.
And then there's also the issue of appeals.
Right. And then there's the issue of appeals. But I think really what's happening is that the courts are catching up with the people. And the people are saying enough is enough. The city has already given up too much of our land, is giving up too much of our space. We're not getting anything returned. We got a homeless crisis that's off the hook. You got development going all over. People are spending almost 50% of their income, 60% of their incomes just to afford housing. Enough is enough. The city has to start listening to and acting on behalf of the residents, of its citizens. Because that's what a city is supposed to do. The city is supposed to take into consideration its residents, not developers. Developers are a tiny fraction of the population, less than 1% of the population. You're supposed to be taking into consideration your population, and you're not. And this city is suffering for that. And I think people are saying enough is enough. We're not going to let you take away public green spaces to give to developers for outside investment firms to make money. We're not going to let you destroy our communities. We're not going to let you displace our people. We're not going to let you create homelessness for our children. Enough is enough, and the courts are seeing it. And we're an example of enough is enough.
Well, what some people, it's not that they don't realize, but it's often not part of the discussion, and that is the developers and the amount of money they make, in addition to what you pointed out earlier, the subsidies that they receive, which is still public money. And we are still paying. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, we can just talk about the first thing. Like developers, we pay for their foundation. You know how expensive a foundation is? A foundation is so much money, and yet we pay for it. Every rezoning. They were bragging about how they've already done about 800 foundations for private developers to build.
800?
And some of these built over 800, and some of these rezonings did not have any affordable housing connected to it. all. That was the only requirement, was that it had to be a rezoning. And they got so many programs. They got the 421A tax, where you don't have to pay taxes for 30 to 40 years. On these developments. And then you got the MIH that allows you to build. You can take a square footage and buy it. It only builds 6 stories, but then you can wind up with a 40-story building, just for free. Not giving anything back.
Yeah, that's how Donald Trump made his money in the 70s. I mean, the city financed Donald Trump's real estate empire here in New York City through the various subsidies.
Speaking of the federal government, there's also the opportunity tax from the federal government. So in my community, on that strip of land, if you develop that land to 2049, you do not have to pay capital gains tax. So this is like a windfall for these guys. You don't pay state and city tax. You don't pay federal tax. You get to build as tall as you want, and somebody lays your foundation for free. Are you kidding? This is just like we pay for it. We, the taxpayers, pay for these developments, and that's the irony. We're about to pay for buildings that are going to destroy a public green space, and we're going to be paying for it. We're going to be paying for it. And they're not going to produce any affordable housing that would in any way alleviate the crisis. If anything, they're going to exacerbate the crisis by moving into a community, the second most affordable community and the densest populated community in Brooklyn. We are the densest populated community in Brooklyn. We have over 200,000 people. We will lose about 100,000 as a result of this massive amount of development. And that is what we are facing here in Brooklyn. And that's why this fight is so important. Because not only do we want to preserve our public green space, but why should we, the taxpayers, pay for it and at the same time create even more pressure on and homelessness and displacement on our children and our elders and our seniors? I mean, enough is enough. And so this is a very, very important fight here.
Oh, to say
very important.
To say the least, it becomes an organizing tool and model to fight back against these very powerful institutions in a real estate industry which practically runs the city. When you look at these mayors and who they have had as their housing commissioner, and all the deals that they've made with Bloomberg. It was with Related. That was a developer that Bloomberg spent some time with. They were here in Harlem and in East Harlem. So how is part of the fight back exposing not only your local elected officials, but also the city-wide, I mean, the higher office, the mayor, the speaker of the city council, and has any, and what I meant to ask before, what local group, church, or institution has joined in support of your lawsuit?
We have a member of the Crown Heights Tenant Union who is one of the pro se litigants, and one of their members actually got arrested with us. So that local group is being very supportive of us. Basically, that's about it. I mean, a lot of community groups have been compromised. You know, a lot of money gets spread around, you know, promises of employment, you know, people who are nonprofits gets a little money and then they're told, you know, to back away from that particular development or that particular issue if they want to keep getting funding. And so, you know, it's not the easiest thing to get But it's easier to probably get individual support than it is to get community-based support in nonprofit organizations here in my community, especially because we're so effective. It's a lot easier to get that kind of support if you're not a very effective resistance. But when you're effective resistance the way that we are, it's a little bit more difficult. But we have a strong array of different types of people in our community that are supporting us. We got young people, we got old people, we got white people, we got black people, we got Asian people, we got people from the LGBTQ community. We've got an array of different types of folks that are all fighting this fight. And everybody's fighting it for a particular reason, but when we all come together, it's one reason, and that is that we want to be able to protect our community and our public green spaces. And so I tend to look at not so much what organizations that are supporting us, the fact that we have such a wide range of support from various entities in our community and even outside of our community. Mm-hmm. For example, there's people who are about to do a fundraiser and they live in Manhattan for us, and they support what we're doing because they understand that it's important. So we're also getting support from outside of the community as well.
Very, very, very good. The final question, and I think it's important that we discuss this with respect to the compromised elected officials. What has been the blowback, either now, currently, or in the past? And since you stated very clearly that communities and people are fed up. They're fed up with this development that is overshadowing their communities. People are being pushed out because when you have commercial development, it certainly impacts the residential rental market. So what do you see as the pushback against those elected officials who have worked with the developers against the interest of their communities, and how do you deal with that in your talks?
Well, I think that, chickens are going to come home to roost. So developers, for example, Lori Cumbo, I believe no longer has a political future in New York City. Because she has been so pro-development and she has agreed to so much development, and there's so much negative stuff about her. Like her political career is done. She's the majority leader, and that's it. She's going to go back to the nonprofit world. She's not going to continue. And we believe that that's going to happen with Eric Adams, that his record is going to show, even though he's trying to be mayor, he's not going to be able to be mayor because his record is going to follow him. And his opponents are going to use that record. They're going to use the statements that he's made against him. And so, these people who want, further political careers are going to be stymied because of that. They're going to be stopped. And let's talk about de Blasio. De Blasio is one of the main reasons why we have all of this gentrification and displacement.
Exactly.
And now his wife wants to come and be the borough president of Brooklyn. Well, that's going to haunt him because we're going to blame everything that de Blasios do. We're going to blame it on his wife. Don't you dare think you're going to come into Brooklyn and say you want to be the borough president when your husband sat there and sold out the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens to developers. No, that's going to follow you. And whoever is running against you is going to use that against you. And we're going to make sure that they use it against you because we're going to be loud and we're going to be clear. Like when she goes there, don't think that you're going to say, oh, that was my husband. Oh, no, no, no. That is your husband. And you are partners with him. And so whatever he does, that's going to follow you. So don't think you're going to come into Brooklyn and be the spokesperson for Brooklyn. So we're going to make sure that we are really clear about our opposition to de Blasio's wife because her husband is the one who's agreeing to all of this development and rezonings in our community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in this environment of these compromised elected officials, How do you begin to look around in your community at some challenges, and I mean, how do you deal with that of these corrupt elected officials in terms of moving forward? What does one do? Do you?
Well, one of the things that we want to do is we want to start pushing and supporting people who have a history of resistance. We don't want, we're not looking for people who have been employed by the city and who used to work for this elected official or that elected official. That just means that they're more part of the political structure that currently exists. We're looking for resistance leaders. We're looking for people who fight on behalf of tenants. We're looking for people who fight on behalf of, on behalf of communities. And we're trying to support that from a grassroots perspective. And we're trying to get people to come out and say, hey, guys, you might be a poor community and maybe you don't have a lot of money to sit there and give a campaign, but you got time. You got energy. You can go out there and spend your time supporting a candidate that you know is going to, work on your behalf. Because if you don't do that, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. If you thinking all you have to do is wait for a card or a leaflet to come into your mail and make a decision, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, that's not how this is going to work. So you got to start putting your foot forward. You got to start getting more involved in your local community. And you got to see who are the grassroots organizers who are now trying to get into political positions. And you need to start following them, and you need to start supporting them. And then you won't be so disappointed when they get into office, because then they'll start representing you, because they come from you. Because at the end of the day, no matter what these politicians tell you, they're still taking development money. Developers are figuring all kinds of ways in which money is going to get funneled to them, so that they can get those flashy cards in the mail. We as a community, and I say you meaning me as well, we have to start saying, wait a minute, I have to do something more. I have to get more involved. I have to start hitting the pavement. I got to start knowing who the candidates are. And I got to start supporting the one who I've seen has been supporting me, who's been fighting on my behalf, who's been fighting on the behalf of the community. And that's the person that I want in office, not the person who's politically connected, not the person who used to work for this senator or that councilman or that. No, those people are corrupt already. They are part of a corrupt system, and they're just going to come in and do exactly the same corrupt stuff. You need to get people who have done work of resistance, because they're going to continue that work when they get in office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, can you talk about the role of, let's talk about some of the other political institutions, for example, the New York City Council, with respect to development and oftentimes giving developers a pass. I can remember the new development that's going to be here in Harlem on the old Pathmark site at Lexington Avenue and 125th Street. Well, that developer was the one whose past plan was passed in the city council, where he proposed affordable housing, but on an alternate site. Away from the market apartments, market rent apartments. So talk about the role of the city council and how you view the city council with respect to your fight. You've already talked about Lori Combo, but just in terms of the city council and how it operates, in particular with this rather fait accompli. If a politician has a project in their district and they approve the project, then the rest of the council members will go along with it.
I was thinking about Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King we just celebrated him, and all the politicians were doing all this stuff about Martin Luther King. And one of the things that he fought for really hard was representation. He felt that once we had black people representing us in the political arena, that things would change. And what we found is that is not the truth. The city council is made up of a majority of people of color.
That's right.
And yet the decisions never support communities of color.
Mm-hmm.
Never. Mm-hmm. They don't support communities of color. Because these politicians get in office and the only thing they think about is themselves.
Mm-hmm.
These are selfish-oriented people. They think only about their own little world that they come from. They think about their own child, their own relative, their own political aspirations, and they lose the sight of why we fought and died for equal rights, to end Jim Crow, to end slavery. They lose that, and they become slaves themselves. Bought and sold. Mm-hmm. Bought and sold. Bought and sold. And that's the problem.
Right. Well, greasing the palm.
There's only
greasing the palm is also a big part of it.
Bought and sold. Yes, this bought and sold. Mm-hmm. And so they say, oh, well, we defer to the local, elected official. But the local elected official is selfish and is only thinking about themselves. And you're not thinking about anybody. The only person that consistently shows up and votes against these things is Charles Barron and Inez Barron, the Barrons from East New York. Mm-hmm. They're the only city council people. Time and time again, every time there's a rezoning in a community of color, they're the only ones that stand up and say no. The only ones. Everybody else, I defer. No, you don't have to. But all you think about is your own political career, your own political aspiration. And unfortunately, Dr. King's dream has not been realized because of the selfishness and the greed of our own elected officials. They could be doing so much more for us in this city, and yet they choose not to. They choose to take their 4 years and their 8 years to enrich themselves and not to enrich the people. And then as a result, we still remain the poorest group. We still remain the highest group of people displaced, and yet they control the city council. They control. It's controlled by people of color. Mm-hmm. And yet we do not see that reflection. And the laws that are passed and the rulings that are done, it just doesn't happen.
I recall during the Columbia University expansion, and it was at the time we went, a group of us in opposition to the university's expansion, which they deemed a civic project, which was ridiculous, a multi-billion-dollar university. But anyway, we were downtown in a council hearing, and this was at the time the council was electing a speaker, and this was when Christine Quinn was elected for her second term as Speaker of the City Council. And I recall very vividly, at the time, Councilman Charles Barron said, listen, let's seize the power. We are in a city that is predominantly people of color, Black, Asian, Puerto Rican, Latino. And let's seize this opportunity so we can advance this empowerment for not ourselves, but our communities. And he begged them. He said, you don't have to vote for me. Let's just seize the moment. This is our moment in history. And they did not. They voted for, except for Tony Avella, they voted for that motion. They voted for Christine Quinn. It was unbelievable. It was just unbelievable.
That's it.
Now, Charles Barron talks about the fact that these impossibilities that the feds are talking about or the city is talking about, and developers have to follow these guidelines. And there's the AMI, which dictates cost per unit. Well, Charles Barron took the position in East New York. No, I'm telling you, you coming in here with a project. This is the targeted income for our communities, and you are not coming in here wanting to charge people $2,000-$3,000 a month when the average income here is under $35,000. You can't do it. I'm not going to go along with it. I don't want to hear anything about the AMI. It's not up for consideration. You will do well by my constituents, and there is no other way we're going to play this game with you. Why can't the others do that? Why couldn't Perkins do that? Why couldn't Lori Combo do that? And you're talking about green space and a cultural institution. I mean, really?
Well, I think the reason why they can't do that is because they start out that way. They start out corrupt. So it's almost impossible. Lori Combo, just to go back and talk about Lori Combo, the majority leader who's the city council person, she was a nonprofit person. So she was already taking money in downtown Brooklyn to support controversial development. She started taking money way back when she was a nonprofit running her Mokata museum for the contentious rezoning that happened with the development downtown Brooklyn with the arena. So she was already taking money. And then when she started to run for city council, she received $250,000 from the developers that none of her opponents were able to raise. And because she had that much more money, $250,000 made the difference in the race. Now she only won by a very small margin, but she still won. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, she had maybe 30%, 28% of the population, and the person right underneath her may have a 26 because there was 4 candidates running. So she just barely made it, but she made it, and that $250,000 made the difference. And she already had come in as someone who was supporting development. You know, nonprofit people are the worst people to ever want to run for city council or any elected official position, because they're so used to always begging for money and they're used to pandering to whoever who's going to give them money, and that's all they think about, right, is how to make money so that their programs can survive, and almost half of their activities about fundraising. So she already came in with a mindset of, you know, pay me. If you want something, give me money. And she came in with that. So it's kind of hard to change, you know, what they say, it's hard to change stripes. You know, we have them. I mean, she came in with the idea that she can sell, you know, that, you know, she had a commodity, and if you want what she can offer, which was her vote, then you had to pay her.
Exactly.
And when she first came in, she got $250,000, and then when she came in as the city council person, she gave over $1 million to her nonprofit. That's how blatant she was. She came in and just took money from the city council and gave it straight to her nonprofit, just like that, and then got matching funds from the mayor's office, who also gave her nonprofit money. So that was always about Lori Combo, and this is what happens without. That's why it's important to look at your elected official who's running and see what political ties they already have. Because if they already have political ties, if they're a nonprofit organization that's used to getting money from developers or whatever, well, they're going to still do that. Because, you know, at the end of the day, this is who they are.
Absolutely.
So she didn't change her stripes. Her stripes were always there.
Yep. They just the stripes got bolder.
That's it. She got more notoriety. She's got more, press, whatever.
Well, our time is, we're winding down here. Let's return to the court case again. Let's talk about your website and how folks can get in contact with you, as well as your fundraiser that's coming up here in Manhattan. So let's go to those four items as we are closing. Let's start with the trial and the case. When will you be back in court?
Right, we're going to be back in court on February the 13th. Of 2020. We're going to be at the Brooklyn Supreme Court at room 366. However, that room is going to be changed on the day of the court date, but we do not know the room number because that courtroom is a little too small to hold the crowd. So every time we go to 366, and then we find out the new courtroom. So if anybody wants to go, it's 366, the Brooklyn Supreme Court, 360 Adams Street. And that's on Thursday, February the 13th, right before Friday the 14th, Valentine's Day. So we're asking people to come out. We do have a fundraiser, so you're welcome to go onto our MTOP site. We haven't posted it yet, but we will be posting it up. It's actually a person's party. She's doing a birthday party, and she wants to have the proceeds given to us. So it's really a sweet thing for her to do. She's an elderly woman who lives in Brooklyn, in Manhattan. And so we will be posting that up on our website. The website is mtopp.org. Again, M as in Mary, T as in Tom, O, P as in Peter, P as in Peter.org, mtop.org. And you can also give a donation. There's a donation button. We have a nonprofit who takes money on our behalf. So if you wanted to make a donation, a tax-deductible donation, that is also possible through the MTOP website. And we just want to say thank you for the support that we've been getting from the community and from the public, because it's been very overwhelming, and it's because the public has been showing up and attending these hearings that we've been so successful currently in our fight.
Thank you for that. Would you like to leave us with any parting observations or summations or summary of our interview here? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what's important is for people to always understand that, no matter what they tell you, it's not true. You have power. You just have to understand how to wield it. Power is not based upon money. Power is based upon conviction. It's based upon love. It's based upon determination. And so don't think that because they're coming into your community that you can't do anything. They would like for you to believe that. There's always things that you can do. There's always ways to fight back. And we have always made progress from that fighting. And we have a history of fighting in our blood. We have a history of resistance. Every time anything has been accomplished in America that has moved humanity forward, it's because of black folks.
That's right. That's
from the ending of slavery to the ending of Jim Crow. And we are the ones who need to keep holding up that mantle, and we need to, because our ancestors fought and died for us so that we be free.
Yes.
Hold up that mantle for our children, because right now our children need a place to live, not just to be free, but they need a place to live, and that's our responsibility. We need to make sure that our children have a place to live, and so this mantle, we need to hand it back to our young people, but we need to hand it back in a higher position than what we got it from.
That
and
is
so
the Black radical tradition. You summed it up nicely. Go ahead.
Yes.
I said that is the Black radical tradition, and you've summed it up wonderfully. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But that's really it. That's it. I mean, just keep the faith. Get involved. Understand that there's things that we can do. We are not powerless. We are powerful people. Sometimes we sleep. We call ourselves a sleeping giant, but we're awake now, and we're moving forward. So keep the faith and come out, support, do whatever you can, get involved, and make a difference. Make a difference.
Okay, Alicia Boyd. The only thing I ask of you is that you get to come back and give us another hour in the future. Thank you so much.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, Alicia, just one parting shot. Have you thought about running for office yourself? I'm sure you have encountered this question many times.
Yes. People have said that to me so many times, and I am just. I'm just not a politician. I'm a political activist. And what I would like to do is I would like to support people who are courageous enough to want to move forward and be politicians. I want to be able to make sure that I push back and confront the elected officials who are not doing their job, because you always need somebody pushing. Yeah. You need somebody like me. You need somebody like me holding the elected officials accountable, making sure that they're doing their job, who are calling them out, and who are organizing successful campaigns against them and against the development. And I'm doing a damn good job. So where I'm at, I'm really doing really wonderful, and I really like what I do, and I'm very successful with my people, not by myself, but my people. And so, unfortunately, I do not want to run for office, but I do want to support people who are truly of like mind as me. I want to give them my support, and I'm hoping that we can find people who are courageous enough to say, yes, I'm going to be that person that's going to stand up for the people and not buy down to special interests or developers or the corruption. I'm going to stand there. I'm going to be the rock. And so I would love to support people in that space. And that's what I plan on doing.
Thank you very much. You've been listening to for the past hour.
You're welcome, Nellie. I really appreciate you taking the time and giving us an opportunity to share.
Anytime.
Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Alicia Boyd from Brooklyn. She is the founder of Movement to Protect the People. Thank you so much. You have been listening to Behind the News here on GHCR Radio 95.9 FM. You can visit us online, on YouTube, rather, by going to or typing in Grant Live, and the site will allow you to pull up the programs, including this one. Thank you so much again for listening. My name is Nellie Hester Bailey, host and producer of Behind the News. Many thanks to our engineer, Doug Frazier, and peace, everyone. Peace and solidarity.